What's going on, everyone? Welcome to the Tuesday, March 18th edition of the Ship My Money Show. I'm your host, Adam Scherer. You can follow me on Twitter at ShipMyMoney DFS. 4-game slate tonight. We do still have some moving parts, but we did get one of the big questions answered right before the show, which is why I did push the start time a little bit. Wanted to be able to rerun my lineups and have everything updated for Steph Curry being out. He is not playing tonight against the Bucks. We have a couple other Q tags in that game that we are still waiting on, but we do know that Curry is out. We have a big Q tag in the first game of the night. Fortunately, it is the first game with LaMelo Ball. Big Q tag in the Boston game as well with Jason Tatum. So even though it is only a 4-game slate, there are legitimate question marks in each game. Evan Mobley is questionable for the Cavs in the late game also. So be paying attention to news as always. Don't let your guard down because there's only 4 games. There is still plenty of potential for this slate to turn into shit like most slates do. So keep an eye out for all that. Be ready to late swap throughout the night as always. But going to go through the slate game by game as I normally do, taking a look at what my player exposures would look like right now and just talking about each game. Obviously, that being the more important part because player exposures are almost definitely going to change. Michael Henry said, will I be conducting these types of shows for MLB DFS? Yes, I will. And on a more consistent basis than I have for NBA. There's just not as much. MLB isn't as time consuming as NBA is. So I can pretty comfortably commit to actually doing these most days. Whereas with NBA, a lot of times it ends up that I plan on doing it and then I'm behind on stuff that I need to do for my lineups and I end up not doing it. That doesn't really come up as much in MLB. Also, not to get too into detail yet, but pretty good chance that I'll actually have some MLB stuff to sell as well, which is certainly another motivating factor for doing these shows. So a long way of saying, yes, I will be doing MLB shows and more of them than NBA shows. So you guys can look forward to that. MLB starting in a couple of weeks. But getting into this one, or before I get into this one, I guess, subscribe to the channel, hit the thumbs up button, turn on notifications. All that stuff helps out quite a bit. Helps you as well. Obviously, you can find out when I'm doing shows if you have those notifications turned on. And also, if you are looking for NBA projections, you can get mine in one of 2 ways. Sign up for Endgame Syndicate using the link in the description below. That gets you not only access to my projections and the Endgame Discord, but also a library full of strategy, game theory, evergreen type videos from myself, Brick75, Uticow, and Nerdy Tenor, talking about a variety of different options or different topics in DFS. So if you're somebody that does enjoy trying to get better at DFS and your goal is not even necessarily to be elite, but to be better than you are right now, that's something I would highly recommend. If you're just looking for projections that you can plug in and use, you can get those using the Dub Club link in the description below as well. That does also come with access to my Discord, so available through either of those links. What are my thoughts on ETR projections? I found the last 2 months they have consistently been off by misreading team rotations. I think they're good. I kind of have this general thought across the industry that the stuff that matters, they're mostly good on. And this isn't ETR specific, even though you asked about them. It's kind of just my take on industry projections. They're good enough. They're not going to miss generally on easy stuff that matters. Where you'll see mostly that industry projections miss is on nuanced stuff within rotations. The problem, if from an edge standpoint, is that usually that doesn't matter too much. It doesn't typically matter if the industry is projecting 16 minutes or 13 minutes to some bench guy. Where I do most often find mistakes in general is kind of projecting. You'll see sites kind of hedge and they'll project like 6 minutes to a guy that probably isn't in the rotation. And depending on the team, sometimes those 6 minutes are kind of just coming out of bench players that it doesn't matter that they're a minute or two short, but sometimes it will be starters. I talked about this on the show yesterday with Denver, for example, when they're missing somebody, you'll often see when they're missing like one starter, you'll see like Hunter Tyson projected for 6 minutes when Hunter Tyson is going to play garbage time and only garbage time. And that ends up being like a minute and a half off of Christian Brown, Michael Porter, guys like that. So you will find some spots like that matter, but your follow-up question was, would I recommend aggregating or is it necessary to adjust things manually that seem off? I would. So you have to be careful aggregating NBA because you need to make sure that you're not like middling a projection. If one source has somebody projected to start and play 30 minutes and another source has them projected to come off the bench and play 15, projecting them for 22 and a half is not doing you any good. You want to be on one of those sides. Obviously that's not the best example since they'll tell you the starting lineup, but you want to be careful with that if you're aggregating. But as long as you are checking the inputs and it's clear that every source you're using is mainly, viewing rotations the same way, I think aggregating is fine. I think that kind of using it as a base and then going through and adjusting the things that you think are wrong is another reasonable way to do it, especially because they're consistently off in kind of the same areas. You get a pretty quick feel for like, okay, I need to double check this team and probably adjust some stuff. But yeah, like I think functionally all of the big industry sites are good enough, but there will be some smaller mistakes that you can potentially catch and do a little bit better. So I guess that's my take on that without being too specific to them, because I think it applies across all sites. Panji said today it's Garrison Matthews. No way he'll play 6 minutes, but they have him in. Yeah, like with Atlanta, it's a little bit different because like they are missing guys. They're missing Karis LeVert, but we did see last game like Matthews wasn't in the rotation. You had Dominic Barlow play 15 and a half minutes. So yeah, you kind of get the placeholder there. But with Atlanta, it's probably that's one where I'd be less concerned about it because I don't think that like Trae Young is necessarily losing minutes because Garrison Matthews is overprojected. It's probably taking, a minute off of some guys that you're not playing anyway. But yeah, that's the perfect example where you'll kind of see like it gets to a point where like giving correct minutes to the actual rotation feels uncomfortable. So you just like throw them to an extra man when that extra man is not going to play. You see it on the Nets a lot too, where they pretty much always, when they're relatively healthy, run a 10-man rotation, but then they'll be projected to play like 10 and a half or 11 when that's just not what they ever do. So that's how I view that. But starting here with Atlanta, nobody questionable for the Hawks, at least at the moment. We do not have Clint Capella. We don't have Jalen Johnson. We don't have Karis LeVert. No Larry Nance. No Keaton Wallace. Trae Young is probable. So we should have a pretty similar rotation to what we had in the last game. Trae Young played 39 minutes in that game. Obviously you're not projecting that, but you are expecting him to play a lot of minutes. I am getting to a lot of George Niang here. He is, where did the salary button go? He's 4,200, so pretty nice price tag there. Obviously a good matchup here against the Hornets. Pretty decent value play here. He's getting 23% ownership. I'm getting to 55%. He is somebody that I would expect my exposure to him to come down pretty quickly if you were to get, for example, LaMelo ruled out, or we probably won't have it by lock, but if you were to get like Pajemski ruled out, that could open some stuff up for Golden State. If you were to get like Jason Tatum ruled out for Boston, then that's going to open up more, Peyton Pritchard, stuff like that, where Niang becomes less of a priority. But as is right now, the playing time for him does look pretty good. Played 26 and a half minutes last game. He did find his way into the closing lineup for the last like 2.5-3 minutes of that game as well. We know that obviously he can get hot from three, and he's just cheap. So looks like a pretty good value, and I am a little bit over the field, or like 2x the field right now, at least on him. Scherer getting 45% ownership. I'm right there. He is someone that also benefits from Karis LeVert being out. Only played 22 and a half minutes last game. That's not what I would expect. He picked up 3 fouls pretty quickly to start the second quarter. He subbed in to start the quarter. He only played 2 minutes and 19 seconds because of those 3 fouls. So he did lose some playing time there. He was not in the closing lineup, which is certainly a risk. You had a closing lineup in that game of Dyson Daniels, Trae Young, Okongwu, Krejci, and Niang. The closing lineup in competitive games for Atlanta is pretty much always going to be Daniels, Young, Okongwu, and then 2, depending on the score, who's playing well, etc., of Niang, Mann, Krejci, and Scherer. But LeVert being out does make it a little bit more likely that Ricochet finds his way into those minutes. Obviously, also, there is some blowout potential here. The spread has moved from, I think it was 6 or 6.5 this morning to 8.5 on the LaMelo Q tag. And if LaMelo's out, not only do the Hornets end up missing their best player and kind of only good player since Bridges is out as well, but you quickly run into the issue where like they might have trouble even initiating offense, and it could just be a really, really ugly game. But that aside, Ricochet here on a 4-game slate, I think does look like a pretty good value option at only $4,400. Trae Young, 25% ownership. I'm about 2x on him as well at 9,800. Happy to get there, if the salaries work out. Obviously, as more value opens up, that looks good as well. I want to double check. So I actually have Trae Young. I have it as a neutral matchup for him from a play type standpoint, but obviously overall, it's still a good matchup for him. Not much defense being played here. So Young looks good. Dyson Daniels getting a bunch of ownership at 6,900. I'm a little bit below the field, but he's still in like a third of my lineups. Okongwu getting 21% ownership. I'm right around the field there. So the 4 starters other than Mo Gay plus Niang, Terrence Mann getting a bunch of ownership at 4K. I'm about half the field, but I think that's just an ownership thing where I am playing obviously a lot of popular players from the Hawks. Man just kind of ends up getting cut out a little bit, but he's still a quality value at 4K. Same goes for Krejci at 4,300. The Hawks just look like a true priority team here. Even Mo Gay is showing up 7% of the time for me. Dominic Barlow is showing up 5%. So it's a function of it being a 4-game slate, it being a very good matchup against the Hornets, and Atlanta being a little bit shorthanded with LeVert being out and opening up minutes there. And it's not even so much as opening up minutes from a median standpoint as it is increasing the volatility of the minutes as well, since LeVert being out does increase the chances of guys like Terrence Mann, Vit Krejci, for example, finding their way into the closing lineup. So Atlanta just looks like a really good team across the board. Again, as you get more value, or if you get more value opening up from other teams, you will probably see some of the interest fall off of Niang and Mann and Krejci, and then get kind of redistributed back towards more Okongwu, Daniels, Trae Young, the higher projected guys, more so than the point per dollar value guys. But either way, the value guys are still going to look good. It's just a matter of how good if you were to get Jason Tatum ruled out, if you were to get Golden State guys ruled out, which you may or may not know ahead of time. If you get LaMelo ruled out, that's going to open up a bunch of value on the other side of this one as well. So even though nobody's questionable for the Hawks, you do have some moving pieces here just because of other pieces of the slate. And the Charlotte team is one of those big pieces. LaMelo projected for 31% ownership right now. I am 2x the field. I am kind of scared to see what value pieces I'm getting to that's allowing me to just jam in Trae Young and LaMelo as if I don't have a salary cap. Pretty good chance that this ends up being irrelevant since LaMelo is questionable, midday downgrade. Seems relatively likely he's not going to play, but it's the first game of the night. No real reason to guess on that. So if he's in, I like him a lot. He is going to have the entire offense running through him. You have no Miles Bridges. You have no like secondary options on this team. I assume the rest of the starting lineup would be Mark Williams, Nick Smith Jr., Josh Green, and Daquan Jeffries. Like none of these are high usage guys. None of them are guys that are going to do anything to get the ball out of LaMelo's hands. So on the one hand, obviously the Hawks defensively can really key in on him. Dyson Daniels will certainly be following him around and making life as difficult as possible. But on the other hand, you're just going to get so many opportunities, and it's not like you are losing points for lack of efficiency or anything like that. So LaMelo looks really good if he is in. If he's out, you do have Damian Ball listed as available on the injury report. So I would expect a bunch of minutes for him if LaMelo's out. I would expect Marcus Garrett to play plenty of minutes if LaMelo's out. Probably get a little bit more Seth Curry. You would have 11 active players for the Hornets if LaMelo's out, but 4 of those guys would be centers with Diabate, Mark Williams, Gibson, and Nurkic. Now you can see Diabate play a little bit alongside Nurkic or Mark Williams. They have done that a little bit, but point being, you would have plenty of minutes available for anybody that's capable of initiating the offense and having the ball in their hands and creating. So, as ugly as it is, guys like Marcus Garrett and Damian Ball would start to certainly look like good values. Ball is 3K flat. So, you would just be getting him in a ton of lineups. Garrett is 3,400. He would be looking good as well. Yusuf Nurkic is one of these ugly value pieces that I am getting to. It's just a price tag that I think is a little bit too low for his ceiling. You have had a relatively ugly center rotation where Nurkic is the backup to Mark Williams, but Diabate's been at least somewhat involved as well. Last game against the Clippers, you got 12 minutes for Nurkic. Obviously not ideal, not really what you're looking for. Against San Antonio 2 games ago, Nurkic played 12.8 minutes. So not exactly what you want, obviously, but if you were to get maybe some foul trouble for Williams or something like that, you can get more minutes potentially for Nurkic. But even at a 13.5-minute projection here, it's just that he's a really good point per minute guy, and he's only 3,300 on a 4-game slate. Again, this is going to just go away. For example, if LaMelo is ruled out, and I can just turn this into Damian Ball or Marcus Garrett or whatever. But right now, with the relative lack of really cheap value on the slate, Nurkic is somebody where at least he's a good point per minute guy. You just have to get lucky on the playing time, but he's essentially minimum salary. So I think he's a reasonable way to differentiate on the 4-game slate as currently constructed, but he is somebody that I'll become less interested in pretty quickly as we get news later. Nick Smith Jr., I assume, moving back into the starting lineup at 4,700 in place of Bridges, should be looked to as a secondary scoring option. Again, they really don't have much outside of LaMelo that can put the ball in the basket. Nick Smith Jr. can take on a little bit bigger role as a scorer, and at 4,700, he is priced more so for his role that he's been playing off the bench. Now, I'm assuming you get him back in the starting lineup, so that looks like a good value right around the field there. Same goes for a 4K. Daquan Jeffries, 34% ownership. I'm a little below the field, but not too much. They both just look like quality value plays. Mark Williams at 8,100 on 2X just for the upside. He has been playing reasonable minutes, has played 29 in 2 of his last 4. One of those games, kind of difficult to figure out what to make of it because it was the game against Brooklyn. He played 28 and a half minutes. He didn't close. It was like a 13, 15, somewhere in there point difference with like 5 or 6 minutes left. Both teams emptied their benches. I don't know if it was just a function of neither team really wanting to win or what it was. So you got 28 and a half minutes without closing minutes. But also in the most recent truly competitive game that the Hornets played, 3-point game against Miami, Williams still played like 28 and a half minutes. He was in the closing lineup. I have him projected for 28 minutes. Probably could take like a minute or so off of that just to account for there being a decent chance that Charlotte gets their asses kicked, but expecting, around 27, 28 minutes from Williams. He is a high upside play. We know he's a very good point per minute guy. And one good thing is that even though Charlotte has gone to this kind of ugly center rotation where all 3 of Williams, Nurkic, and Diabate are getting minutes, they've mostly done it in a way where Nurkic and Diabate are cutting into each other's minutes, and they're mostly leaving Mark Williams alone. It's not the same rotation that we were getting early in the year when Nick Richards was still on the team, and you were getting Richards, Williams, and Diabate all playing like 20 minutes or less, like anywhere between 12 and 20 minutes. They haven't gone that route. So Williams, from a tournament standpoint, as long as the ownership is low, does look fine. Josh Green at 3,900 should play a bunch with Miles Bridges out. The problem is that he sucks at scoring fantasy points, so can't get too excited about him, but sub 4K on that looks pretty good. Wendell Moore at 3,100, good point per dollar value, projects almost 6x. The problem that I see is just that he is getting 30% ownership right now, and it's just so unlikely that Wendell Moore puts up enough raw points to beat you. But with the value we have right now, I do understand why he's getting some ownership. But I think if you kind of like look at just the Charlotte value pieces, you can kind of see why Nurkic is showing up for me. It's not anything to do with me thinking Nurkic is in a great spot or going to play a ton of minutes or anything like that, but he basically projects the same as Wendell Moore in like half the minutes because he's such a good point per minute guy compared to Moore or Green. And I'm just hoping that Nurkic beats those guys. Again, you're probably going to get guys ruled out to where Nurkic falls off and becomes irrelevant anyway. But I think that's sort of how I'm approaching these guys right now is like, yes, Wendell Moore projects as a little bit better value, especially when you factor in the opportunity cost of the positions. I think that Moore should be more popular, but given that he is, and there's only so many ways you can get creative on a 4-game slate, there are just lineups where, I'm getting to LaMelo, I'm getting to Trae Young, I'm getting to these popular pieces, and I need to be different somewhere. So I'm just saying, okay, well, hopefully 12, 13 minutes of Yusuf Nurkic outscores, 22 minutes of Wendell Moore. I think it happens often enough that it makes sense in this particular lineup. If we were to take a look at some of the Nurkic lineups that I'm playing, LaMelo in 31% of them, Risa Shea, another popular piece, in 85%. Trae Young's in 46%. Daniels is in 30 whatever percent. If you just look down this list, I'm getting to very popular players with Nurkic, and that's what I would want, what I would expect, because I don't think Nurkic is a good or a great like standalone individual play. This goes back to talking about lineup level takes and considerations versus player level. It's not, oh, I really think Nurkic is good. It's in these lineups that have 45% owned Risa Shea, 25% owned Young, 51% owned Giannis, 46% owned Daniels, 31% owned LaMelo. I don't then want 30% owned Wendell Moore also. I'm going to just hope that Nurkic outscores him in those lineups. So that's something, obviously that is always important to keep in mind when you're seeing individual player exposures. Usually it's not going to be that I have a crazy take compared to the rest of the industry on a player. It's more so going to be that I happen to have chosen a lot of lineups that have this player because he just fits into those lineups nicely. We just got a bunch of notifications. I don't know if it's player injuries or people just blowing up my Twitter. I think it's people just blowing up my Twitter. But Trae Young is confirmed available, so that is good to know. Moving on to Brooklyn at Boston, obviously plenty of blowout risk in this one. On the Brooklyn side, no Q tags to worry about. Probable tag on Zaire Williams, probable on Noah Clowney. No Reese Beekman, no Tyson at Etienne, no Tosin, however you pronounce Tosin's last name. Obviously, no D'Anthony Melton or Cam Thomas, no Whitehead. So we should have a 10-man Brooklyn rotation here. They have enough bodies. Maxwell Lewis would probably be the 11th man. No ownership at all coming into this team, and I am in pretty much the same spot. I do think Nick Claxton may be going a little bit underprojected across the industry, but even with me coming in a little bit higher at 29 minutes, it's not getting him into a lot of lineups. 6K is a pretty good salary, but obviously the matchup sucks. There is blowout risk. There's just other spots that I'm getting to, but if you do have individual lineups where you need somebody in the 6K range that does have a ceiling and is not popular, Nick Claxton does fit that mold. Just not somebody that's showing up much for me. Same for Russell, Sharp, Cameron Johnson, Zaire Williams. These guys are all firmly in that bucket of, if you see a lineup that has the minute, there's no reason to like throw the lineup away or think that you screwed something up or that they're bad plays, but they're just not fitting into that many lineups for me. On the other side for Boston, I would expect to be getting at least a little bit more exposure over here. Like I said before, Jason Tatum is questionable. We already have Jaylen Brown out. So if Tatum ends up being out, you are going to have, Horford look even better, White look even better, Holiday and Pritchard look even better. With Tatum projected in, it's still not a true priority team, but I do think it's kind of an interesting team in tournaments. Jason Tatum, I'm not getting to, but you could certainly make the case that at 7% ownership, he is really interesting in tournaments because obviously you're kind of projecting his minutes a little bit lower because of the spread, but there's still a decent chance this game just is competitive. It certainly wouldn't be the first time that Boston just plays down to their opponent and plays a competitive game, and you end up getting the 37 Jason Tatum minutes instead of 34 and a half. So there is obviously upside for him, but he is expensive at 10.8. Beyond that, though, Al Horford at 5,100 just looks like a pretty decent value play. Derek White at 7,300, Porzingis at 7,800. These guys all certainly have ceilings. It's just that none of them stand out as top options to get to from a value standpoint. For Tatum, he's still, like $1,000 more expensive than LaMelo and Young. I would assume that I get to a bit more Tatum if LaMelo is ruled out, because if LaMelo is ruled out, it's going to open up not only value, but value at the guard positions in particular. And it's just going to make it that much easier to then pay up for Jason Tatum, assuming he plays at a forward spot. But for right now, going under the assumption that LaMelo's in, I am prioritizing LaMelo more at the cheaper price tag. I'm prioritizing Trae Young more at the cheaper price tag. And it is costing me some Jason Tatum, but certainly that changes if LaMelo is out. So this is another team where you're just going to see things change at least somewhat if LaMelo's out, because the value pieces become a little bit less interesting when you don't need them anymore. But then guys like Derek White, Porzingis, Tatum, that maybe are a little bit overpriced for their median, you become less concerned with that because you just have an abundance of salary that you can redistribute to those guys. It doesn't matter that they're overpriced by $500, $600 because you just have more salary than you know what to do with. Milwaukee, no relevant Q tags taking on Golden State. Giannis is probable. Dame is probable. Gary Trent Jr. is probable. No Bobby Portis, no Jericho Sims. Giannis getting 51% ownership. I have 30% right now. Again, I would just expect to be getting to more Giannis if LaMelo does get ruled out because of value opening at the guard position and then me being able to just funnel salary to the forward spots, just like I was saying with Jason Tatum. Giannis clearly looks very good here. One issue I think probably that's holding back how much I'm getting to him right now, not only is the salary at 11.5 and the fact that right now we don't have great value across the board, but if you are paying 11.5 for Giannis, you do start also running into the problem where your lineups are going to be constructed in a very similar way to other, the rest of the field that's playing Giannis. So not just thinking about it in terms of Giannis's individual ownership, but thinking about it in terms of the combinations that come with Giannis. If I'm playing 11.5 for a forward, where else is that pushing me? And so that's probably something that's kind of limiting me a little bit too. But if you're to get like LaMelo ruled out, you kind of start to get to a situation where, yeah, that's an issue. And in some cases, an even bigger issue because like you're going to see so many Giannis plus Damian Ball lineups. But you also get to a point where if you're avoiding those, you are really giving up a lot of projection. And it kind of just becomes like a situation where you just have to kind of suck it up and eat it because if I just say, well, I'm not going to play the best point per dollar value on the slate and I'm not going to play the highest scorer on the slate together, I'm probably just making some really shitty lineups. And so kind of just have to, at that point, suck it up. But right now, when you do have LaMelo, when you do have Trae Young that you can go to at half the ownership, that's an approach that I'm taking. Kevin Porter Jr. here getting 12% ownership. I'm 2x right now. He's another one of these value pieces that looks a little bit less interesting if LaMelo gets ruled out. He has been firmly in the rotation for the Bucks. He is playing at least some minutes next to Damian Lillard, which is nice. One thing that, depending on how you want to view it, it's a positive or a negative, but in these large field tournaments, I think it's more of a positive. Kevin Porter's playing time is extremely volatile. Only have him projected for 18 minutes here. He's mostly been the backup to Lillard, but he is playing alongside him a little bit. But if he plays well, he can find his way into more minutes. Like if Kevin Porter Jr. is playing really well, he doesn't have to, lose minutes to Taurean Prince or Gary Trent or AJ Green. Those guys are generally going to be playing the same, if not more minutes than him. But if he's playing well, he can find his way into more minutes. That volatility in tournaments does lead to a higher ceiling at low ownership, which is nice. But again, if you're just getting Charlotte value with LaMelo out, you're going to be less interested in Porter, but still would make him, a viable contrarian pivot because he's only $800 more than Ball and like $400 more than Garrett. And those guys would both be quite a bit more popular, I would expect. Kyle Kuzma getting 26% ownership. I'm at 19%. I think he looks fine at 5,300. Should play low to mid 30s, assuming a competitive game here, and look pretty good. Taurean Prince, Damian Lillard, both I think kind of just secondary plays where Lillard obviously has a high ceiling, but he's not that much less expensive than LaMelo and Trae Young. My interest in Lillard probably increases a little bit if LaMelo's out, but the problem becomes that then you have the best value at the guard positions. So it probably wouldn't increase interest in Dame that much because the opportunity cost gets higher. But Milwaukee looks like another team, kind of like Atlanta. Less interest overall in Milwaukee than Atlanta, but just another one of these teams where you can kind of just go throughout the whole team. Anybody that plays relevant minutes is playable here, from Giannis down to Gary Trent and Prince and Porter. Brook Lopez, can play more minutes with Bobby Portis out as well. Also now, he is missing Jericho Sims, which is noteworthy because Jericho Sims has been the direct backup to Lopez with Portis out. So you really don't have, like Giannis, I assume, is getting the backup center minutes here. I'm not really sure where they go if they have a one direct backup, but you could certainly see more playing time for Lopez with Sims being out. The problem is that he's still not a great point per minute guy, but at 5,600, there is the chance that he just plays 34, 35 minutes here since he just doesn't have a backup at this point. So something to keep in mind where he's not getting any ownership, and maybe that is one way that you could get creative as far as low owned plays go. Michael Henry said KPJ produces so many fantasy points in minimal time, which they gave him more minutes. Yeah, Kevin Porter Jr. is definitely one of those guys that he's in that spot of he's a great fantasy player and he's not a particularly good real life player. And so the Bucks' interests do not align with ours, but that is the nice thing, kind of like I was referring to with him. The production's going to be there usually, and if he is actually playing good basketball, they can just play him more minutes, and he's priced to not play those minutes. So that's why you can kind of take advantage of that volatility. Question: any core you can give me for a tournament with over 20,000 people? This show is geared towards large field tournaments, so yeah, I mean, watch the show. I'm telling you who I'd be getting to right now. I'm telling you who the field's getting to. I'm giving you my thoughts on everybody, so I don't really know how to do it any better than that. Golden State on the other side, no Steph Curry. Brandon Podziemski is questionable. He's missed the last few games. Steve Kerr had hinted that he'd be back today. He said he wasn't going to play the front end of the back-to-back. Hopefully he'd be back for the back end, but we're waiting on that. We also have a Q tag on Quentin Post, who started yesterday but did not play in the second half. So there is some stuff to like here. Jake DeWitt said, sorry if I missed it. Any thoughts on KJ Simpson? He is out. So unless he gets activated, my thoughts would be don't play him. But, obviously, I don't know where Charlotte's G League team is. Like, I don't know if they're on the road or if they're just all sitting around in Charlotte waiting to be made active. But he is listed as out with the G League. Damian Ball is confirmed available. So unless that changes, don't play KJ Simpson. And again, also assuming that doesn't change, it's why you can just be even more confident in the minutes that you're getting if LaMelo's out for Ball and Garrett, because they are like the only two on-ball guys really that they have. Nick Smith Jr., I guess, being the third, sort of. But yeah, he's out. So Golden State, keep in mind that ownership here is kind of wonky because we just had the Steph Curry news broke not long before the show. So this will change a bit, but I am interested in a $5,500 Jonathan Kuminga here. He is a good point per minute guy, and we did see him play like 27 and a half minutes yesterday. He closed that game, got to 27 and a half minutes. Good point per minute guy, obviously has upside. He's only 5,500. You can see him take on a bigger offensive role without Steph. It is the back-to-back, so maybe they're a little bit cautious with him, but he's not on the injury report at all. He's not even listed as like probable or anything like that. So I have him in for 25 minutes, give or take. And I think that's pretty reasonable. I don't think it would be shocking if he only played 23, but I also wouldn't be surprised if he just played what he played yesterday. If Post is out, it probably makes it even a little bit more likely that Kuminga finds a couple of extra minutes. But if he really is 16% owned, I'm certainly interested in him in tournaments at only 5,500. Brandon Podziemski at 5,700. Again, he's questionable, but if he is available and if he's starting, I only have him projected for around 27 minutes at full. If we're assuming that he's not limited at all, I would have him projected for like 32. So this is a pretty decent haircut based off of where I would normally project Podziemski if he is starting without Steph Curry, and he's still showing up quite a bit for me at only 6% projected ownership. Again, you probably, or maybe at least, see that ownership number come up a little bit once the industry has more time to adapt for Steph being out. But I think that he's a decent point per dollar option, just like Kuminga is. Obviously, if we get more news on whether or not he's going to be limited, that would be useful as well. Jake said, so Kuminga will be in the starting lineup, but Kerr will miraculously make him a DNP-CD. Yeah, never put anything past Steve Kerr when it comes to, one, screwing with his rotations in general, and two, screwing with Jonathan Kuminga specifically. He's very good at both of those things. Draymond, 6,200, no bump for him with Steph out. One thing to keep in mind, obviously there's a tendency in general, like you get your best player out, and there's a tendency to just say like, oh, well, option number 2 and option number 3 become better. Keep in mind, Draymond sucks at scoring. Draymond is a playmaker. He's a facilitator. He's somebody that actually benefits from Steph Curry being on the floor because Steph's going to convert a high percentage of the potential assists that Draymond gets. So Draymond looks fine here because he's probably playing around 30 minutes. He's reasonably priced at 6,200. All of that is true, but you're not looking to him as somebody that's really benefiting from Curry being out. Jimmy Butler certainly can benefit from Curry being out. The offense should be running through Butler more here. I'm not getting as much as the field right now, projected for 37% ownership. I don't have a huge problem with the ownership number. Like, he clearly is a better play, but I think this kind of just better play with Curry out. But I think this kind of just goes back to another instance of if I'm prioritizing Trae Young and I'm prioritizing LaMelo, it's going to just cost me some Jimmy Butler, and I'm okay with that because obviously I'm not mad about getting to those guys. If LaMelo does get ruled out, I probably do end up getting to more Jimmy Butler just because I have more salary available and because he is forward eligible, where I'll probably be paying down more at the guard positions. Moses Moody should play quite a bit with Curry out, but he is also 5,300, so tough to want to get a ton of him. If Podziemski were to end up being out as well, that would also probably mean more minutes for Moody, more minutes for Hield. But as is right now, I think they are kind of just secondary plays. No real ownership coming into anything else on Golden State. It looks like Butler is the priority for the field, followed by Draymond and Kuminga. For me, I really like Kuminga at that price tag, especially if the ownership is projected where it is. If that ownership does come up to like 25%, I still think he's fine, but obviously my exposures to him would come down a little bit. And then wrapping this one up with Cleveland taking on the Clippers in LA. Noah Clowney is available to play. Zaire Williams is available to play. The Sixers are still refusing to play basketball tomorrow. No real surprise there. But the probable guys for the Nets are confirmed in. No Neil. We have not switched over to any porn yet. Sorry to disappoint if that's what you were looking for, but there are some other channels that are into that. Jake said, do your projections consider your play type data? And is anything standing out today that you think could be under projected? Yeah, I have automatic adjustments in for play type data that adjusts on top of scoring projections. Right now, Al Horford actually showing up as the best play type guy. I don't know the specific reason. I didn't look, but it's not a huge adjustment. As far as on ball guys and scorers, James Harden has the biggest adjustment here. Porzingis has a little bit of an adjustment, but there's nothing that stands out as like great for me. James Harden would be the one that I think is probably the most interesting, especially because it's not a good matchup against Cleveland. But from a play type standpoint, it's looking good for whatever reason. I can try and look quickly. 36% of James Harden's offensive possessions have been in isolation, 27% in the pick and roll, 16% in transition. So that's where most of his offense is coming from. I have a positive adjustment in isolation against Cleveland. They're a very good team. I have a negative adjustment on pick and roll. I have a negative adjustment on transition, but I do have a positive adjustment in isolation. I don't know from the screen that I'm looking at whether that is lack of efficiency or just opportunities for Cleveland. I have my stuff set up so that it accounts for both. So it could be either one, that I just think Harden's going to get more opportunities and not necessarily be efficient, but just get more opportunities at what he likes to do, or that they do just kind of struggle to defend that. But I have a little bit of a positive adjustment on Harden for that reason. On the Cleveland side, Evan Mobley is questionable. If he is out, you expect more production to be available for Donovan Mitchell and Darius Garland. You also expect more minutes potentially to be available for like Isaac Okoro, Hunter. The problem is that a lot of the minutes probably get backfilled by guys that aren't great fantasy options since they're all available. But one thing that I will point out that I think does have a tendency to go overlooked, if Evan Mobley is out, the Cavs are missing their backup center, which means more minutes typically for Jarrett Allen. It's a spot where you kind of have to be aware of Cleveland's rotation because obviously you think of Evan Mobley as your 4, you think of Jarrett Allen as your 5. And so if Evan Mobley gets ruled out, there's kind of just like a rush to fill in these minutes at power forward. But you have to remember that like half of Evan Mobley's minutes are coming as the backup to Jarrett Allen. So if he's out, you do probably get a couple more minutes for Jarrett Allen, especially going against a Clippers team that, does have traditional center as well. So I would like Jarrett Allen at least somewhat more if Mobley is out. The problem, of course, is that there's a couple of them. One, he is center only, so the opportunity cost is high. He is $7K, so he's not super cheap, and he is in the last game of the slate, so there's a pretty good chance that by the time we find out whether or not Evan Mobley is even playing, you have already lost at least 2 of your games. Golden State doesn't have anybody that you're like slamming in at center that you'd be flipping to to Mobley. Maybe you turn some of your Draymond into Mobley. The Bucks don't have, you're probably not playing that much Brook Lopez, and he's less expensive anyway. So you might just have trouble really being able to take advantage of it anyway. But Allen would project better for me if Evan Mobley ends up missing, along with Mitchell, along with Garland. You could find some more minutes for Ty Jerome, Max Strus as well. But overall, I don't think there's any true priorities coming from Cleveland. Donovan Mitchell getting the most ownership at 18%. I'm a little bit lower than that, but I think he looks fine. Evan Mobley, I'm 2x the field right now, but still not a huge priority in 12% of my lineups. Good player, low ownership, 4-game slate. Always nice to be able just to find those guys and hope that they do what good players do. Jared Allen, Darius Garland, Ty Jerome all showing up around 4 to 5%. But again, I think you would get to at least a little bit more Donovan Mitchell, Darius Garland, or at least would want to get to a little bit more Donovan Mitchell, Darius Garland, Jared Allen, if Mobley does end up being ruled out. Don't think any of them would end up being top priorities in the context of the slate or anything like that, though. And then finally, wrapping things up on the Clippers side, getting about half the field on Kawhi. He's just too cheap still. He's 8,200. I understand why he's getting ownership here, but I think this is just kind of like Jimmy Butler, where I have to make cuts somewhere as far as the popular players that I'm getting to. And right now, it is cutting out Kawhi a little bit to get me some more of the other popular guys that I am getting to. But I would also expect to be getting some more Kawhi if LaMelo ends up being out, because I would have 60% LaMelo to redistribute to relatively expensive players, and you would have less opportunity cost at forward than at guard when it comes to value. So I think you would probably see some more Kawhi from me if LaMelo gets ruled out. If you can get to some Zubats at center, great. Obviously, the matchup's not ideal, but he is a good point per minute guy. He's likely to play a bunch of minutes here. And then James Harden, I'm always happy to see something like this. Jake asked about the play type adjustments. This is something that I think is really important to reiterate, because there's always a tendency on any show like this, and it's not a knock on anybody, because it's just kind of what you have to do, but you dive into, I like this matchup for XYZ reason, or I think that Harden has a sneaky kind of good matchup, or better at least than people are going to give him credit for, a matchup against Cleveland. You have to actually quantify all of that stuff. You don't want to just blindly say, I like James Harden. I'm playing James Harden everywhere. I think people are a little too low on James Harden, so he's in all my lineups. I think people might be a little bit too low on James Harden, and the result is that he's in 9% of my lineups instead of 4. You want to keep all of that stuff in context, that giving a little bit of a scoring bump to James Harden still doesn't make him look great at $10,300 or anything like that. It just makes him look a little bit better than he would otherwise. So I'm over the field on Harden right now, but still not taking any sort of big stand. James Harden can go out there and suck against Cleveland, and it's not really going to impact my night whatsoever, at least with the way things look right now. If he does go out there and have a good game, I'm in a little bit better position than most people will be, but not making a huge impact on my night one way or the other. Kawhi, Zubats, Harden, obviously the guys that you would expect to be showing up in lineups from the Clippers. I don't really have any argument or case I can make for anybody else, unless you wanted to just get to Chris Dunn or Derek Jones and just hope that they beat all of the other 4K guys. I don't think it's super likely that happens. So for the Clippers, I think it's just getting to the 3 pieces that you would really like to get to. Norm Powell is at 7,200, so I think that is a very difficult sell at this point, given his injury history, status, whatever you want to call it. But the main 3 pieces here, obviously fine with whatever I get to. And I would expect to be getting a little bit more, especially of Kawhi, if LaMelo ends up getting ruled out. Maybe I get some more Harden if LaMelo's out too, since that would open up a high-end guard spot. But the problem is that you have really good, cheap guard value at that point. DQ said, yeah, it's always easier to cut out the 7 to 8K range players and hope they just get 35 to 40. Yeah, so there's 2 reasons for that. One is that there's just an abundance. There's always a surplus of those guys. They'll vary as far as their medium projections go. Some are obviously going to look better than others, but there's never a shortage of 7 to 8K players that are capable of getting 55 fantasy points. Some obviously are more likely than others, and the ones that are more likely are going to get a lot of the ownership. But when you think about how ownership gets concentrated, it's going to get concentrated around the highest projected players and the best point per dollar values. Usually there's going to be a pretty limited number of 4K or less guys that you could look to. If you have, a couple of really good point per dollar, 4K guys that are starting, there's not going to be that many reasonable alternatives, because there's only going to be a couple 4K guys or at least, good point per dollar 4K guys that are starting. So it's difficult. That's why it's difficult to get away usually from, your chalky 4K starting point guard. On the other end, somebody like Giannis or Trae Young or LaMelo, Jason Tatum, guys like that, there's only going to be so many guys on a slate that are capable of scoring 70 or 80 DraftKings points. So, it's difficult to say, well, I'm not going to play Giannis. There's not that many Giannis's out there. But then you get to that 7 to 8K range, and you're going to get ownership coming into the guys that are most likely to score 50, but there's never any shortage of other 7 or 8K guys that can score 50, maybe at half the rate of the guy that everybody else is playing, but you'll get the field playing that guy like 4 times as frequently. And so it's just usually easiest to find pivots in that 7 to 8K range, whether you're getting out of that range entirely and going more stars and scrubs, or just finding more contrarian plays in that range. That's usually going to be the easiest place to do it for those reasons. So that's all I have for you on this one. Only 4 games, but a lot of moving parts that we will have to keep an eye on. Hope you guys enjoyed the show. Don't forget to hit the thumbs up button, all of that. I'll be back here again tomorrow, or at least I plan to be, for what I assume is going to be a nightmare of an 11-game slate. Don't know what the injury report looks like, but I assume it'll be a shit show. But I will be back to talk through that tomorrow. So subscribe to the channel, thumbs up, turn on notifications, all that stuff. Good luck on your lineups tonight. See you back here tomorrow.